Welcome back to Justice Reloaded HD, where small acts still matter. Today, I want to ask you something simple. Have you ever bent down, gently blew on a spoon of hot soup for someone else, and realized you were warming more than just the broth? Sometimes, what looks like an ordinary lunch becomes a turning point in someone's life. Sometimes, it takes just one quiet moment of kindness to awaken something that's been missing for years. This story begins on a chilly afternoon, in a little diner most folks would pass without noticing. But inside, at table 4 by the window, a billionaire father sat with his disabled son. And a young waitress unknowingly changed their lives with one simple gesture. If you believe that one small act of kindness can reach into the deepest corners of loneliness, then take a moment to like this video and subscribe to Justice Reloaded HD. Because every week, we share stories that remind you, even in a world that sometimes feels too fast, too cold, or too far gone, there's still warmth in a simple gesture. Still hope in the hands that reach out. Still reasons to believe in people again. Your click helps keep these stories alive. And maybe, just maybe, it helps someone else believe again too. It was the kind of cold that crept up your sleeves before you even noticed it. Spokane, Washington was slipping quietly into winter, and the glass windows of a small diner near the edge of downtown were fogged with the breath of strangers who just wanted something warm to eat. The sign outside flickered faintly, and inside, the clatter of cutlery and hum of soft jazz filled the air like a blanket no one had asked for but everyone appreciated. Ethan Walsh walked in with the kind of presence that said he didn't want to be recognized. The gray coat, the low-brimmed cap, the silence. But people still turned their heads. There was something about him that said money, even if he wasn't trying. He slid into the corner booth by the window, gently guiding his son into the seat across from him. Sammy was 7. His limbs moved like they were chasing behind his thoughts, never quite catching up. His hands twitched slightly, and his jaw sometimes clenched unexpectedly. Cerebral palsy, the doctors said. Mild, but enough to make the world a harder place to hold. A waitress approached. She had a kind face and a quiet way about her, like she'd learned how to move through the world without making it flinch. Her name tag read Jenna, but that wasn't what you noticed first. What you noticed was the way she looked at Sammy, not with pity, but with something softer. Something steadier. She set the soup down. Chicken noodle. Steaming. Comfort in a bowl. Ethan was just about to thank her when he noticed Sammy struggling with the spoon. The boy's fingers curled awkwardly around the handle, his other hand trembling as he tried to steady the bowl. His lips pressed tight as he concentrated. The spoon wobbled, soup spilled. Again. And again. Then, without a word, Jenna pulled the chair beside Sammy and sat down. Ethan tensed, unsure what she was doing. Waitresses didn't usually sit. They didn't usually stay. But Jenna simply smiled. Not the big, performative kind of smile people sometimes give to disabled kids. No, this one was gentle. Small. Like she was telling Sammy, I see you. And I'm not going anywhere. This soup's pretty hot, she said softly, lifting a spoonful. She blew on it. Once. Twice. Just enough to make the steam dance. Then she held the spoon steady, bringing it slowly to Sammy's mouth. He opened. No mess. No rush. No shame. She did it again. And again. Each motion was patient, precise, and somehow sacred. She wasn't feeding him, she was honoring him. Ethan watched from across the table. His hands were still on the menu, forgotten. Something in his chest stirred. A flicker of memory, perhaps. A time when someone else, his late wife maybe, had done the same. Or maybe it was just the rawness of watching someone care for his son in a way he hadn't known how to in a long, long time. Jenna never looked at Ethan. Not once. Her eyes stayed with Sammy. There was no rush in her, no performative kindness. Just presence. And somehow, that presence filled the room with something warmer than soup ever could. The soup was gone now. Just a few golden streaks left clinging to the rim of the bowl. Sammy sat quietly, eyes soft, his lips curved into the faintest smile like something inside him had settled for the first time all day. Ethan hadn't said much throughout the meal. He'd watched, observed in the way men who have built empires often do. Eyes sharp, hands still, face unreadable. But something had shifted in his posture. Something small. Less guarded, perhaps. Jenna cleared the empty plates with the same quiet grace she'd carried since the moment she arrived. She didn't linger. Didn't speak unless spoken to. Just worked with the kind of attentiveness that comes from someone who knows how much small things matter. When she reached their table again with the check in hand, Ethan was already holding something in his. He hadn't touched his wallet yet. Just the receipt, and a pen, which he'd used not just to sign, but to write a few words near the bottom of the slip. He looked up at her, his eyes calm but direct. "Did you study medicine?" he asked. The question landed softly, but Jenna's fingers froze for just a second as she took the check. She looked at him surprised, not defensive, not flustered, just caught off guard by how precise the question was. And how quietly it was asked. She nodded. "I was in nursing school," she said after a beat. "Made it to my 3rd year." Ethan tilted his head slightly. "Why didn't you finish?" Jenna hesitated, then offered a gentle shrug, as if the story didn't need to be told in full. "My mom got sick," she said simply. "Stage 3 lymphoma. I dropped out to take care of her. Chemo doesn't wait for finals." There was no bitterness in her tone. No self-pity. Just facts. Quiet truths from someone who'd learned how to hold pain without making it someone else's burden. Ethan didn't say anything for a moment. He just nodded once, slowly. Then he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a sleek, minimalist card, matte black with silver embossing. No flashy logo. Just a name and number. He placed it gently on top of the receipt. Alongside it, tucked neatly under the corner of the plate, was a folded stack of bills. Jenna glanced at them. $1,000. In crisp hundreds. Her breath caught. Not because of the money itself, but because it felt intentional. Thoughtful. Not a mistake, not a flex. "I'm not tipping you because of how well you served the food," Ethan said quietly, his voice low, almost hesitant. "I'm tipping you because of how you saw my son." Jenna blinked. Her lips parted, but the words didn't come right away. No one had ever said something quite like that before. "I'm looking for someone," he continued. "Not a nurse. Not a therapist. Just someone who can sit with him, the way you did." She looked down at the card, then back up at the man whose name she hadn't even known when he walked in. "I'm not sure I'm qualified," she said softly. Ethan smiled, not big but real. "I'm not hiring you for your skills," he replied. "I'm asking you because of your heart." And then, without another word, he rose from the booth, helped Sammy into his coat, and left the diner with a quiet nod in Jenna's direction. She stood there for a long time, the card still in her hand. Outside, the wind had picked up. But for the first time in a while, Jenna didn't feel cold. The next morning, Jenna arrived at the diner just like any other day, tying her apron in the back and checking the coffee pots before the first rush of regulars trickled in. She had barely clocked in when her manager called her over, a curious look on his face. "There's someone asking for you," he said, gesturing toward a booth near the back. Said his name is Ethan. Brought his son. Her heart gave a small lurch. Jenna wiped her hands on a dish towel, straightened her posture, and walked toward the table. There they were, Ethan seated neatly with a cup of black coffee, Sammy by his side, wearing a thick hoodie and swinging his legs under the table. The boy looked up as she approached, and his face lit up, not with the excitement kids reserve for toys or candy, but with a kind of quiet familiarity, like he was seeing someone who made the world less scary. Jenna smiled and greeted them both, but Ethan didn't waste time with small talk. "I appreciate you meeting with us," he said calmly, his voice low and measured. "I know this might sound unusual, but I wanted to ask if you'd consider something." She tilted her head slightly. "I'm looking for someone to spend a little time with Sammy. Not as a nurse, not as a caretaker, just as a presence. A friend. Someone who doesn't flinch when he spills his juice or stumbles over his words. Someone who sees him as more than a challenge." Jenna looked from Ethan to Sammy, whose eyes now rested on her, steady and open. "I'm not offering a full-time position," Ethan continued. "Just a few hours, a couple times a week. When he eats. When he plays. When I'm in meetings and can't be there. It's not clinical. It's not complicated. I don't want him to feel like he's always being managed. I want him to feel seen." There was a pause. Long enough for the offer to settle between them. Jenna could have asked about pay, hours, expectations. But none of that mattered in that moment. Because what she saw, what she felt, was not a job. It was that look in Sammy's eyes. That spark of trust she hadn't seen in a long time. A child who didn't look at her like she was another adult trying to fix him, but like someone who already got him. "I'd love to," she said finally, her voice soft but sure. Ethan nodded, not with relief, but with something closer to gratitude. Jenna didn't accept because of the tip, or the business card, or the fact that it came from a billionaire in a designer coat. She accepted because sometimes, the right thing to do isn't about logic or money. It's about knowing that you've been placed in someone's life not to save them, but to remind them they're worth saving. The first time Jenna stepped into Ethan Walsh's home, she noticed how quiet it was. Not the kind of quiet that came from peace, but the kind that settled when people had forgotten how to fill the space with laughter. The walls were tall, the floor spotless, and everything had its place. But there was a stillness to it all, like the air itself was holding its breath. Sammy waited in the breakfast nook, his legs swinging from a tall chair, a bowl of soup in front of him. His eyes lit up the moment he saw her, and that alone made Jenna feel like she belonged. She didn't rush. Instead, she walked over, sat beside him, and tucked a napkin gently into the collar of his shirt. "You want to try this together?" she asked, picking up the spoon and offering it like an invitation, not an instruction. At first, he hesitated. His hand trembled as it reached for the bowl. But Jenna guided his other hand underneath, showing him how to hold it steady, how to let both arms work together. "Two hands," she whispered, smiling. "Just like superheroes. Stronger together." Sammy giggled. The spoon clanked against the edge, a little soup sloshed over, but Jenna didn't flinch. "That's progress," she said, patting the napkin into place like it was a royal sash. Each visit after that became a little less about what Sammy couldn't do, and more about what he was learning to try. Jenna encouraged him not just to move, but to speak. Instead of waiting silently for help, she'd ask, "What do we say when we want to try something ourselves?" Sammy would smile shyly, and whisper, "Can I try?" At first, it came out unsure. A question he wasn't sure he was allowed to ask. But over time, the words grew bolder. "Can I try?" became a proud declaration. When he spilled his drink one afternoon, the cup toppling from the edge of the table and sending juice across the tiles, he froze, eyes wide. He looked to Jenna like he expected a scolding, or worse, disappointment. But Jenna just chuckled. "Spilling soup? That's nothing," she said, grabbing a towel and kneeling beside him. "What we really have to be careful not to spill is trust." Sammy tilted his head, confused. She wiped the floor and smiled at him. "It's okay to make messes," she added. "But when you trust someone, and they drop that, that's the kind of spill that takes longer to clean." Sammy didn't say much, but the way he looked at her said he understood. Ethan often watched from the hallway, leaning quietly against the wall, arms folded. He didn't interrupt. He never gave instructions or offered corrections. He simply observed, like a man watching a language he'd once known being spoken again in front of him. And something in his expression softened each time. After Jenna left, Sammy had started doing things Ethan hadn't seen him do before. He'd wipe his own mouth with a napkin. Try folding it neatly, even if it turned into a wrinkled triangle. He would whisper to himself, "2 hands," before picking up his bowl. But more than that, he smiled. A real, unguarded, toothy smile. It was a smile Ethan hadn't seen in months. Maybe years. And it had nothing to do with therapy plans or progress charts. It came from the quiet, patient presence of someone who had chosen to see Sammy not for what he struggled with, but for what he carried inside. And for the first time in a long while, lunchtime in the Walsh home wasn't quiet anymore. It was filled with giggles, clinks, and the soft encouragement of someone who knew the true weight of a spoon, and the power of belief. It started with a headline. A local paper, small circulation, but just big enough to make noise, ran a story that twisted something beautiful into something suspicious. Splashed across the page in bold, accusatory letters were the words, "Widowed billionaire hires waitress to be son's companion, fairy tale or emotional exploitation." It spread quickly. People who had no idea what kindness looked like under pressure suddenly had opinions. Comment sections filled with judgment. Talk radio buzzed with skepticism. Ethan's inbox overflowed with questions from PR reps, investors, and even board members asking if the story was true. Some said he was lonely and vulnerable. Others claimed Jenna was a gold digger in disguise, preying on a grieving man and his disabled son. No one asked Sammy what he thought. The next time Ethan saw Jenna, he wasn't the calm, thoughtful man she'd come to know. He was guarded. Wounded. Afraid. He sat across from her in the very same booth where it all began, but his eyes didn't settle with the same quiet clarity. His fingers tapped the table. His voice, when it came, was clipped and cold. "I think it's best if we end this," he said. "For everyone's sake." Jenna didn't speak at first. She looked at him, not in anger or confusion, but with a sadness that came from understanding far too well how fast the world could turn on people who dared to care. "I didn't ask for this job," she said quietly. "And I never asked for your money." "I know," Ethan replied. "But perception matters. And right now, people are watching." She nodded slowly. Then he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out an envelope, thick, sealed, clearly filled with more than just a final payment. "I want you to have this," he said. "For your time." Jenna looked at the envelope. Then at Ethan. Then slowly pushed it back across the table. "I didn't give Sammy my time," she said. "I gave him presents. There's a difference." Ethan's jaw tightened. He wanted to say something, maybe defend himself, maybe justify his fear, but nothing came out. Jenna stood. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a folded slip of paper. It wasn't big. Just a torn piece from her server's notepad, written in blue ink. She placed it gently on the table and walked away without another word. Ethan waited until she left before he picked it up and unfolded it. The message was short. "I wasn't helping your son eat. I was just there, when he needed someone to wait with him until the last spoonful." There was no signature. No contact number. Just words, honest, quiet, and heavier than anything money could weigh. That night, Ethan sat alone in his study, the note still in his hand. Sammy had gone to bed early, quieter than usual, refusing to finish dinner. When Ethan asked him why, the boy just shrugged and looked away. "Soup's fine," he mumbled. "It's just colder without her." Ethan didn't respond. He couldn't. Because in that moment, he realized something. It wasn't the scandal that had stolen something from his son. It was the silence he'd chosen in its wake. And the absence of a woman who never saw Sammy as a job, but as a boy worth waiting for. The house felt colder that week, even though the heat was on. Maybe it was the silence. Or maybe it was the way Sammy kept looking toward the front door, like he was waiting for something, or someone, that wasn't coming back. Ethan noticed the change. His son, usually so eager to greet lunchtime with curiosity, now sat listless at the kitchen table, shoulders slumped, eyes distant. When Ethan set the bowl of chicken noodle soup in front of him, Sammy didn't reach for it. He didn't even look. Trying to ease the tension, Ethan grabbed a spoon and scooped a small portion, careful to let the steam rise before bringing it to his son's lips. "Here you go, bud," he said softly. But Sammy turned his face away. "No," he whispered. Ethan blinked. "It's your favorite." "I said no," Sammy repeated, more firmly this time. His voice was still small, but the weight behind it was unmistakable. Ethan exhaled, puzzled. "Is it too hot? Too cold?" Sammy was quiet for a long moment before answering. "It's not that," he said finally. "The soup's okay. But it's colder without Miss Jenna." That sentence didn't hit Ethan like a punch. It was quieter than that. Softer. But it still broke something open inside him. He looked at his son, really looked, and saw not just resistance but loss. It wasn't about soup. It never had been. It was about warmth. About safety. About the feeling of being known without explanation, of being seen without conditions. Jenna hadn't just helped Sammy eat. She'd helped him feel like he mattered, even when his hands trembled and his words got stuck. Ethan sat back in his chair, spoon still in hand, and let the moment wash over him. He had built empires, negotiated billion-dollar deals, and spoken on stages around the world. But in that moment, sitting across from his son and a bowl of untouched soup, he realized there were things success had never taught him. The next day, Ethan stood outside the diner. He wasn't wearing a tailored coat or hiding behind a driver. Just jeans, a wool sweater, and something more unfamiliar, humility. When Jenna stepped out with her hair tied back and a to-go tray in hand, she stopped cold at the sight of him. Ethan met her eyes. "I tried feeding him," he said, no preamble. "He wouldn't eat." Jenna waited, saying nothing. "He said the soup was colder without you." Something flickered in her expression. Pain, maybe. Or love. Or both. Ethan took a breath, then added quietly, "I don't need someone to help my son eat. I need someone to help him feel like he matters, even when he can't hold the spoon." He looked down for a second, then back up again, voice soft but steady. "I need to relearn how to blow on soup," he said. "And I was wondering if you'd teach me, with the kindness I forgot how to show." The tray in Jenna's hand began to tremble, just slightly. But for the first time in days, her heart warmed. Because finally, someone had seen what she'd been offering all along, not just help, but presence. Not just service, but love. Sometimes, life teaches us that love doesn't always roar, it whispers. In the quiet act of blowing on a spoonful of soup, we are reminded that the smallest gestures often carry the deepest meaning. This story isn't just about a waitress or a billionaire. It's about the unseen kindness that still exists in the world, and the healing that happens when someone is truly present for another. As we age, we begin to understand. People may forget what you did or what you said, but they will never forget how you made them feel. The older we get, the more we realize that dignity, connection, and gentleness are not luxuries, they are lifelines. So the next time you sit across from someone, child, spouse, friend, ask yourself, am I here to fix them? Or just to sit with them, spoon by spoon, until they feel whole again? That is love. That is legacy. And that is enough. If you've ever been handed a warm spoon of soup on a cold winter's day, not just for the hunger, but for the heart, go ahead and leave a like on this video. And don't forget to subscribe to Justice Reloaded HD, where we believe the smallest acts can still change a life forever.